political and economic conditions. But what I want to stress for you and for the discussants is that with the Libyan case, we are facing today a number of philosophical questions. I would put it like that. What is a statehood today? So whom we should trust in Libya? Because if we continue the logic of cooperation between states, we need to know who is a reliable partner over there if we continue cooperation among the states. If not, what are the new formats for cooperation? Because I started with the philosophical questions, because probably we're facing a new architecture of the world today. Probably states are no longer relevant. So we should think of some other forms of organizing the communities, societies, people, and probably Libya is facing is the first in the new era of organizing the world. So if not, what? How can Libya be helped from the outside forces? What the Libyans can do themselves in order to make their life more easier, predictable, prosperous. And of course, I believe the expertise you have within your institution is of high value for us because you're from the ground, you know it better than we do. Although we have our own perceptions and our own expertise, and I believe my colleagues will share with you their vision. But we want, first of all, to see your vision and what is the picture of the future from your angle. So please, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. And you are right, this new technology is enabling us to have this meeting, and I'm grateful to be in Moscow without having to suffer the weather. I'm enjoying sunshine of Tunisia today. Okay. And yet I am enjoying your company and your expertise, so thank you very much for the time. Now, regarding the questions you ask, they are very important, broad, and as you say, philosophic questions. And they are remarkably important because in the daily struggle of day-to-day events, it is very easy and of overall architectural and architectonic issues. And I believe that the way you open the discussion is actually remarkably helpful. So thank you for that. Let me begin by saying that the foundation for any discussion we should have about Libya must always be the Libyan people. And that is very, very important. And the Libyan people have aspirations and had aspirations, have dreams like all other peoples of a safe country, of a prosperous country, of a thriving country. And that is why there was an uprising, and that is why we have struggled ever since. These aspirations are again and again frustrated by stakeholders and actors who try to benefit from the chaos that has happened after 2011. But we must never lose sight of the aspirations of the Libyan people. Second point, which is very important, we must never forget the structure of how Libyan society is organized and what the human people, what the Libyan people in terms of human beings consists of. It's very important to note that the Libyan people are not just a set of monads or individuals. That already, when we say the Libyan people, we are talking about a tapestry, a pluralism of a very rich variety of communities. And this communal dimension of Libya is very important to keep in mind because it forms the social fabric of the country. And many of the solutions and the attempts by the UN fail, and many of the ideas of the international community fail simply because they don't quite recognize how Libyan society works and how Libyan humanity works. The Libyan person is not only an individual with individual bourgeois aspirations. The Libyan human being is already communal. In outside of the big cities, we are nearly all tribally organized. We belong to clans and to tribes and tribal groups and also tribal alliances, and these factors are extremely important. Even in big cities like Tripoli, which is very cosmopolitan and very mixed, even the neighborhoods in Tripoli tend to be organized around past tribal allegiance. This is because when people in the 1940s and 50s and throughout the 60s immigrated from the countryside to Tripoli, they settled near their cousins when they came to town. So even in Tripoli, you find neighborhoods that are mainly from Tarhuna, neighborhoods that are from Kikla, neighborhoods that are from Murfalla, from the various tribal groupings of the west of Libya. Some neighborhoods tend to be more from the south, some neighborhoods tend to be from the east. And neglecting the social fabric of Libya has been the single most important mistake of all the international engagement with Libya since 2011. And remarkably, every single success story for achieving ceasefires or achieving understandings or achieving some sort of balance, some sort of security structure has always been negotiated by the elders of our communities and our social fabric. Even in cities, it's not only clans that are important, but even neighborhood concepts. And during Ottoman times, each street had a kind of what they called Sheikh al-Shara, which means the leader of the street. These elders formed a kind of a natural grassroots leadership. All of this is still, despite modern times, is still remarkably alive. Furthermore, as the state collapsed after 2011, and as the rule of law collapsed, and as the justice system collapsed, this system of social fabric organization became even more important because it offered a kind of safety net for people. And when there is no law to protect you, there is no justice to protect you, you tend to count on your cousins to protect you. So these social factors did not get any weaker after 2011. On the contrary, they actually have become stronger. One of the remarkable things about the period of 42 years of Gaddafi rules is that it was so centralized. Gaddafi tried to implement a centralized state along a socialist model that kind of learned from the Soviet Union and from Yugoslavia and from Cuba. And it was centralized planning with centralized army, centralized police, centralized everything, centralized banks, centralized national oil company. The only time such a vigorous centralization was attempted was during the time of fascist Italian occupation under General Graziani and also General Balbo. It is remarkable that locality during these centralizing years was not respected. And in many ways, what happened after 2011 is the re-emergence of local tendencies and local sentiment. It is very important today, as we try to rebuild the Libyan state, not to build it from a centralized perspective, but to actually very patiently knit it together, stitch it together from the varied communities that are already existing and are already solid and are already fairly stable. I believe that local security should actually become the responsibility of local authorities, that the spending of government money should be based on municipal councils, not on centralized planning and centralized expenditure. I think that stabilization in Libya from the top down, which has been attempted since 2011, has utterly failed. Stabilization of Libya can only happen from the bottom up. And that is why the ceasefire that I'm honored that our institute participated with the sheikhs of Bani Walid in this. The ceasefire that was achieved recently between Tripoli and Tarhuna is an indicative of the abilities of the social fabric to self-heal and to self-repair. If only respected and given the resources it needs, I think there is a lot of chances for kind of self-healing of communities coming together. So to conclude my very long answer to your very difficult but important question, statehood in Libya must be a statehood built from the bottom up. It must be built on respecting locality and on knitting together a fabric that respects pluralism, but also recognizes the importance of centralized coordination, at least in setting standards and audits, and in making sure that all communities are treated with respect and equality. So this is a very long way of answering your first question.
Okay, thank you. It's, I think, a very good starting point for our discussion. And before I pass the floor to Grigory to moderate our discussion, I want to continue some of the ideas, to support some of the ideas you have expressed, and the fact that the Libyan society is not understood properly because of the lack of this perception and understanding of Libya as a community of communities, if I can put it like that.
Exactly, yeah.
So do you think, I want to put it very directly, do you think it would be easier for the countries who understand it from their own social experience, how to manage this social fabric, those who have these tense social contacts, clans, if I could put it like that, is it easier for these societies and countries to deal with Libya rather than those who will have another level of the development and stick to more centralized rules, or so they have another story in shaping their societies, so probably they lack this experience or forgot about this. So do you think from your own experience, it's easy for those who still understand this pattern, or just it doesn't matter? So it can be.
I think it's very difficult to generalize. You know, if you look at every society and every great country, great civilization, you will find that they all have two tendencies: a tendency that knows locality and respects it, and a tendency that is oblivious to locality and centralizes everything. Even in America, they have a tradition, like a Jeffersonian tradition, of the concept of a country of little republics, a community of communities. These ideas do exist in Jeffersonian thought. When we come to Russian civilization, Russian history, yes, during the Soviet Union, there was a huge tendency to uphold centralized planning and centralized tendencies. However, even during that time, the Soviet Union, through the Russian Academy, which has a 200-year history, was very respectful of locality and had huge expenditure on anthropological studies, expertise in Africa, expertise in the Orient, that were quite minuscule, and your museums and your libraries and the Oriental Institute and the Africa Institute are all indicative of how much detailed knowledge existed during the Soviet Union. During these more kind of post-Soviet times, maybe expenditure is not as much on these studies, but that would be a huge mistake. You know, I think that the Russian people, as a people who do understand multi-ethnicity and do understand multi-faith, multi-culture, and who try to make a country put together from a multiplicity of communities and nations in many ways, are better placed to understand what we are dealing with. However, I must also caution that even in Russia, there are tendencies that tend to obliterate these localities and who try to impose a single idea. One of the issues we have with Russian policy towards Libya recently is that there is a kind of a Gaddafi legacy schemata that tends to govern Russian thinking about Libya to a large extent. If not academics, young academics like your good selves, at least some of the media people are set on the same kind of pattern. You know, Gaddafi was a great man. He kept the country together. He was anti-imperialist. He was a patriot, and he died unfairly. And the West interfered, and NATO destroyed the country, and now it's a big mess. We must get beyond this narrative, even if it is true. You know, we must invoke what is positive about Russian ideas and Russian thinking, and ask what can Russia contribute to the mending of communities in Libya and to the healing of communal strife in Libya. Is it through, for example, mediation efforts? Is it through providing a platform for meeting of various communities? Is it maybe a contribution in trying to contribute to national reconciliation? That is how Russia can help. It does not help to keep telling us in the Russian media that Gaddafi was the best thing and that the only solution is his son. It just doesn't help. Yes, you are right to emphasize that it's very important to accommodate and include former regime elements and the Gaddafi family, and I personally believe that Saif al-Islam should have a right to run, and that his family must be treated with respect, and that there must be some sort of rectification of the wrongs that were done, the summary executions and the killing without trial. All of this is crimes. I am not covering it up in any way, but I think we must go beyond that situation, and we must ask our Russian colleagues to develop a new thinking, you know, thinking outside the box, because you are eminently qualified. You have a legacy of knowledge of not only your own multi-cultures, but also of Africa, including Libya, you know, and this knowledge should be invoked. You have some amazing Libya experts, both of the generation of Stanislav and older, but also of younger people like Grigory and others who are now doing research on Libya. So, it's a long answer to your question. I think countries that have multi-ethnic experiences and that have community of communities like Russia can definitely understand us better. But you also have some issues that you must be able to transcend as well. Just as every other country and culture, we have positive elements and negative elements. We should try to rehabilitate the positive that is in our legacies. You have a remarkable tradition of Oriental and African studies. You should not lose that, and the government should spend money on it, and you should make an effort, and you should listen to the people who actually have spent a lifetime studying things. You know, it was remarkable. I got a book on Libyan poetry from a Russian scholar, and I found some papers and studies about ethnicities and anthropological studies of Libya. These should be translated and should be made known to the world, and we should tap into them, you know. And as an institution, the Libya Institute for Advanced Studies would love to cooperate with RIAC and other institutions in Russia to actually make the contribution of people like yourselves known, and where we can have more exchange and more conferences together, more meetings where it's not just me briefing you, but maybe other Libyans who have different opinions. It's important to make a scholarly base for mutual understanding. And that is why the first things we did with Russia was not a political agreement or political lobbying, but scholarly cooperation, you know. And we signed an agreement with the African Institute, and we hope to sign further agreements with other Russian institutions. And I am very, very happy that Stanislav has agreed to be on our board of advisors, because he's helping us to navigate the waters and to get to know people like your good selves who can be partners in this mutual understanding and mutual exploration.
Thank you.
experts, and I would like to pass our virtual microphone to Grigory Lukyanov, a senior lecturer at High School of Economics, for moderating our discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our great words of greetings to RIAC, to you for your hospitality that you made this meeting possible with all these great people who are here for the discussion.
Who are interested in Libya.
And not only interested, but also some of them are great experts. So before we start, we continue the discussion. I would like to offer to my colleagues to introduce themselves for Dr. Knight, because all of us, we know who is he, but he doesn't know nothing about us. So please, colleagues, try. I will be the first, and then Grigory Lukyanov, the senior lecturer of High School of Economics in Moscow, and also the research in the Institute of Oriental Studies of Russian Academy of Science.
My name is Dmitry Tarasenko, and I'm from the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies.
Yes, my name is Ruslan Ahmedov. I'm the MENA program coordinator here at RIAC.
And my name is Tagir Tagirov. I am from Gimor University, the Institute for International Affairs.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Knight. I'm Ibrahimov Ragim. I'm from Imam University.
Stanislav Mizintsev, your representative here.
And my teacher, thank you.
Very good. Andrei Sheprykin, High School of Economics.
So we have a few key points for discussion, which we have collected before this meeting about some problems, domestic problems, and also some problems of international relations around the so-called Libyan problems. Libyan problem. I would like to start and point your attention on one issue. We have also Elena Alexeyenko of RIAC, who also is a great specialist in Italian and European politics, contemporary politics, and one of the main issues which is connected with Libyan problem, so-called Libyan problem, and which is very important for European countries, is migration problem. Maybe we will start from this issue, from this question, because it makes this problem more understandable, not only for specialists in Libya, but also through one of the main issues, main challenges in North Africa and North Africa-European communications. In this way, Dr. Knight, maybe a few words about your vision of migration problem and its future, some attitudes to solving this problem.
Yes, you know, human beings are very special beings, and they are beings of ultimate value, as Immanuel Kant points out. However, there are certain dynamics that are comparable to physical systems. I studied engineering before I studied philosophy and theology, and one of the courses I did in engineering was fluid mechanics. Immigration issues are ultimately an issue of flow. You have a disparity, you have a differential, as in fluid mechanics. When you have a difference in pressure, there will be fluid flow. There is a disparity, there is a huge gap between the misery that millions of Africans are living in and the prosperity, relative prosperity of Europe. Some of it is a fictional prosperity of Europe, you know, but definitely there is a differential. It is remarkable that people, when they talk about immigration issues, always focus on immigration issues at the state level, while it's actually a regional phenomenon. And there can never be a rectification of the migration issue if we don't address the root causes. The root causes is that for centuries, Africa has been siphoned off its natural resources and wealth to the benefit of the North. without reciprocation of development and services delivered to the people. It is very difficult to close this issue if you don't address the issue of poverty in Africa. The fact that even though Africa does not contribute much to environmental degradation because it does not have that many factories and that many emissions, it suffers the most from climate change, droughts that have killed entire communities, entire civilizations, entire peoples. These are problems that are too big. They're not Libyan issues, they're not European issues, they're actually global issues. And there has to be an addressing of these issues. And the amazing thing is people are willing to spend billions on blocking the flow, but they're not willing to spend hundreds of millions on improving the situation of the populations to make them stay in their own countries, you know. So this is one remark which I would like to say, is that I have not yet seen any attempt by the Europeans or North Africans to join hands on how we can solve the issues of the African countries from which these poor people come. The second issue, which is very important to address, is the disastrous policy of Europe, which they are now calling a success in Libya. Their policy is very simple. They have supported a very how can we say, congenial and malleable government in Tripoli, the government of national accord, the presidential council. Basically, they got them to sign all the agreements they wanted, with Italy in particular. Agreements that basically make Libyan Coast Guard catch immigrants in Libyan territorial waters and send them back to Libya to be held in Libyan holding facilities. This has solved the issue of Europe by basically arresting the immigrants and putting them in holding facilities in Libya. But for Libya, it has meant a population of almost 1 million Africans in holding facilities. And these holding facilities are so dreadful. I don't want to historically distort or to abuse the term, but they are almost like concentration camps. And of course, nothing compares to the concentration camps of the Holocaust, but the misery that people are living in these holding facilities is actually remarkably painful and difficult to understand how humanity can still tolerate that kind of behavior. There were some stories in the media about it, but for the most part, there is a lot of cover-up for this, because the Europeans, even though they visit these facilities and so on, don't want to face the fact that they have basically thrown these needy Africans into a really horrible situation. This is not a solution to the immigration issue. This is a creation of a big problem, not only for Libya with 1 million souls in difficult conditions, but also it's a humanitarian disaster and a human rights disaster of an amazing scale. This must stop. We cannot do this. We cannot continue to do this. It makes no sense for the Libyan Coast Guard to arrest people in Libyan territorial water and make them a problem for Libya and put them in difficult humanitarian circumstances. Europe should face this issue. Europe must understand that when it extracts natural resources from Africa and where its industries are based on natural resources from Africa, it owes Africa some development money, some development projects. And Libya, maybe as a petrol-producing country, can contribute to such a fund. I think that we should and should help our neighbors, but Libya should not take the burden of having to manage over 1 million souls in very difficult circumstances when our own country is already at war. So the immigration issue is really a very important one. Mr. Salvini, the Italian foreign minister and the interior minister, was celebrating the success of Italian policy towards Libya when it comes to immigration, but there is nothing to celebrate. It's a total disaster. So-called Operation Sophia has nothing to do with Sophia. Sophia in Greek means wisdom, you know. It is a very unwise policy. and I think it will backfire eventually. How would we address the immigration issue? There should be a complex solution consisting of development programs for African countries to which Europe and Libya can contribute, maybe with countries like Algeria as well, and also programs of agricultural projects in the south of Libya. We do need labor, we do need help, but it must be done in an organized way. We should be creating jobs for not only Libyans, but also for Africans who may help us in the south, in particular for agricultural projects and maybe some industries. But there should be a comprehensive solution, not a jailing solution where you throw people into holding facilities that are Hello? Can you still hear me?
Yes, now it's cool. Yes, it's good. We hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, I cannot hear you very well. Maybe the second question or second topic.
Oh, the second topic. Okay. Colleagues, maybe you have some questions or.
Yes.
Just a question. You mentioned earlier the kind of bottom-up approach towards the building of the state, and you said that any top-down approach failed. You know, there is kind of an impression here in Moscow and then in some parts of the European states that it is still possible to have some kind of a military solution for you know, kind of gather some different communities, you said earlier, about into one community. My question will be, do you still find it is possible to have a military solution? Do you consider some kind of a scenario which will, you know, kind of come from abroad to facilitate one of the parties of the Syrian conflict to, you know, take power in the end? Or still, if we kind of have a stance on, you know, bottom-up approach, how do you see the intra-community ties, which will kind of help to gather all the communities into one community? What other tools could be used by different parties to do this? You mentioned earlier about sheikhs of Bani Walid or others. How do you see, for example, sheikhs of other places in Libya sitting together and trying to understand how to find some structural ways of, you know, building somehow a new country?
Yes.
What are the tools, and if they are economic, please mention them.
Okay, your question is remarkably complex. It has different strands. Let me first of all speak about the military solution, the so-called military solution, and then I will speak about the social fabric, kind of what I would call the social contract, and then we will talk about economics at the end. Let me begin with the military. Many people say that now what is happening today is that the military has secured the east of the country. They have just finished mopping out terrorist cells in Derna and have moved to the south. Yesterday they have consolidated control on Sharara oil field, which is the biggest in the country. And most of the south now is under the LNA, or the Libyan National Army. And some people say that maybe the best solution is for the LNA to continue to advance to the west and to Tripoli and to just get it over with. Only a strong army can mop out and destroy terrorists, and then a state can be built on a unified consolidated army control that has monopoly on coercive force. This narrative may sound very wise, but it misses some important facts. 95% of the work of the LNA in the south, for example, and even in the oil crescent before, was actually social fabric negotiation. It was not military invasion. I myself participated in this process, and I myself participated in the negotiating with the Tuareg, even yesterday, last night, and the day before, and the day before that, and with the Tabu, trying to get the Libyan Tabu to separate from the Chadi Tabu, and they did yesterday. The Sultan of the Tabu made a very important statement, which we helped to get out. And before that, I got the Megarha and the Warfalla to work together through a meeting that was organized in Bani Walid. So the army's advance in the south has been prepared for by a huge amount of work at the social fabric level. I am not doing this alone. I am doing it with tens, actually hundreds of elders and sheikhs and notables and even young people, some young women, who are working day and night to try to prepare the ground for the entry of the Libyan National Army. The overtaking of Sharara is a case in point. What happened last night was not Ali Kanna being defeated. It was actually the soldiers and officers working with Ali Kanna switching sides to side with the LNA and to say to Ali Kanna, we're not going to fight our brothers. And this was based on a negotiation. This was not based on military invasion. Okay? Also with the Tabu, yes, there were some operations against the Tabu that may have led to their change in position, but the Libyan Tabu were convinced through negotiation, not through military coercion. So the solution for Libya, yes, it has a military dimension, of course. You need the military to destroy ISIS, you need the military to destroy Qaeda. You cannot have a state with the cancer of terrorism anywhere in it. However, military action by itself does not work. You need social fabric acceptance. Also, we worked very hard at the Institute to work with Prime Minister Abdullah Thani from the East, from the interim government, which is almost forgotten by the international community, to deliver not only foodstuffs, but also medicine and emergency supplies and the electricity repair and sewage water suction and removal. All of these services delivered to the south are an important part of what the LNA is doing and what the interim government is doing and what the social fabric leadership is doing. So it's a complex solution. It's not just military. Now, the second question you asked, or the second part of your question, regarding how you can connect the various communities so you can make a community of communities. As you well know, all countries, including yours, must ultimately depend on a constitution. That constitution is oftentimes not written. What's more important than a written constitution is what we can call a social contract, or a social understanding, or a social accommodation, or a social kind of foundation. We at LIAS organized several conferences on the Libyan social contract, and we have been working very, very hard on that. It is, you cannot stitch communities by just setting them side by side. You have to have ligaments that connect communities. And in order to create community of communities, you must have some principles on which we all agree. That we should not kill each other, that we should not steal from each other, that our resources are for all of us, that there should be fair distribution, that women and men should be respected in their dignity, that communities must be protected. These are principles and we have a draft already that was produced by a committee in Bani Walid that will be circulated amongst the tribes, who inshallah will be convened very soon in Bani Walid for a pan-Libyan tribal meeting that will try to issue a kind of a social contract document, something that we can work upon. Now, the third dimension of your question, which is the economic relations and economic dimension, Libya has vast economic resources. It also has a vast national infrastructure. We must develop a sense of trusteeship or stewardship of all these things. And there must be a sense of equity. The problem we have today is that the oil is pumped out from areas that are controlled by the interim government and its parliament and the Libyan National Army. But 100% of the revenue goes to the national oil company based in Tripoli, which deposits the money at the Central Bank of Libya, which is controlled by about 9 managers who belong to the Muslim Brotherhood. So we have a huge issue of the revenue being produced by most of the country and the revenue being spent by a small clique, I would say a small mafia of Islamists associated with some corrupt militia heads and warlords and some corrupt merchants. And this is a key reason of the conflict. When the Libyan National Army took over the eastern oil fields and tried to divert the revenue to the national oil company in the east, the whole world acted against the LNA and they demanded that the control must be given back to the NOC West, which happened, and they helped during that negotiation. But part of the negotiation was that the World Bank and the IMF and the UN would conduct an audit on the Central Bank of Libya to check on the funding of terrorism and to check on the corruption and where the money was going. Until now, the audit has not started, even though the LNA has respected its commitments and has delivered all the revenue to the NOC. Unless this major structural issue of abuse of government funds or of public funds is addressed, it will be very difficult not to have further wars, you know. So economic stitching together is important. Social fabric stitching together through social contract is important. Military coordination is important, but more importantly, social preparation for military control of certain areas is amazingly important. This is my long answer to your complex question.
Colleagues?
Well, thank you very much for detailed explanation. I'm sorry I was late for the main presentation, so I might be repeating something which has been said previously. Actually, I would like to go back to what Ruslan asked now about the stabilization bottom up. That intrigued me to no end, as a matter of fact. Would you please be so kind as elaborate about the essence of this principle, the stabilization bottom up? Are we talking about the post-Westphalian kind of state? Are we talking about the escape of Libya from the nation-state principle, which is quite, as a matter of fact, to my mind, is very dubious today? That is the first question. And the second question, probably this is a bit not very general, but very particular, but this question which bothers me quite strongly is the what is your take on the role of political Islam now in Libya, and in particular I'm interested in the relationship between Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafis, and in particular what I hear recently, the Madakila, the Madkalis in Libya, if they actually exist there, because I doubt that very much, personally. But the competition between Salafi and MB, and what might be the impact on that competition on the referendum or on the time when Libyans manage at the end of the day to go to the polls.
Okay, again, I will try to address your question in two parts. The part about the kind of nation state and the nature of the state, and then the second part regarding the Muslim Brotherhood and the Madkhalis, kind of the religious dimension to the dilemmas in Libya. Now, you know, the notion of a nation state consisting of individuals who vote in a bourgeois manner not only doesn't exist in Libya, but I think is actually dangerous for Libya. The fact is that there is no such thing as the Libyan individual in the Western model, in the bourgeois model of a single rational decision maker, a la Adam Smith, or the political economy of David Ricardo and Malthus and these people. Libya is very communal. Every Libyan is already carrying in his persona a community, and Libyan identity is very complex. A Libyan is a Muslim of a particular school, and the tribesman who belongs to a particular tribe, and a neighbor who belongs to a particular neighborhood, and a political person who has certain political ambitions and tendencies, and an economic person who happens to be of a particular class and a particular economic group of interests. So Libyan identity, as in many countries, is a complex identity. I believe the Libyan nation state must be a community of communities. It must be a set of little republics that are stitched together through some sort of a communal social contract between, a kind of a contract between communities, which I think is the only foundation for a stable future, stable Libya. No one today can tell Misrata that it should just forget about its identity as a little republic. It is already a little republic. It controls its own port, its own airport. It controls its own revenue. It has gateways that let people in and not let people in. So it's very hard now to tell Zintan that they can just melt back into the Libyan state after they have achieved a kind of almost a little polis in the mountain, you know. It is historically interesting that our own capital, Tripoli, is actually 3 cities. And it was called Tripoli because it's 3 polis. It was a confederation between 3 little republics. The Cyrenaica was historically, during Greek times, called Pentopolis because it was built, it was an alliance between 5 cities. I believe that Libya today should be a kind of a republic of an understanding or an alliance between about 105 municipalities. I believe that municipalities are absolutely important. Part of the problem we've been having is that everything has been so centralized. If you actually divide the oil revenue on municipal basis based on population so that there is a fair distribution, I think we will resolve 70% at least of our problems, including problems of corruption, lack of delivery of services, and lack of attention to the needs of the Libyan people. That's my attempt at an answer to your first or the first dimension of your question. Now, regarding the Muslim Brotherhood and the Madkhalis, let me just give a little bit of historical background because it's very important. Libya historically, for about 1,000 years, or a little bit less, achieved a kind of religious consensus in doctrine or principles of faith. We have historically been Ash'aris, and in jurisprudence we have been Sunni Malikis, and the spiritual dimension of our religion we have been Sufis, usually of the kind of Baghdad school of Sufism, including Shadili, Qadri, these kinds of tariqas. This consensus, there was only one exception to it, which was in the mountains, in the areas populated by the original population of the Amazigh. There developed the Ibadi school, which is like the one in Oman. Apart from the Ibadis, there was universal consensus on the main school. And it was connected with Al-Azhar in Egypt, Zaytuna in Tunisia, Qarawiyyin in Morocco, and the various oasis schools in Algeria, Timbuktu, Borno, all of this North African Islam, which is very similar to what Morocco is practicing today. This was the consensus. We developed 2 new strands that were new to the country. In the late 1940s, King Idris gave refuge to maybe 4 Muslim Brotherhood figures who ran away to him from Egypt. And that was a huge mistake by His Majesty, may God bless his soul, because these guys basically started the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya, which has developed throughout the decades, despite the oppression of Gaddafi and despite his jailing of them and so on. They managed to thrive and to come back after 2011 in a very big way to control the Central Bank of Libya, some of the intelligence services. They controlled the deputy defense minister position, deputy interior minister position. So they even though they were small in number, they managed to control some key positions in the country. This is one tendency, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, that became even more radicalized after the Sayyid Qutb period of the 60s, especially his famous book Ma'alim fi al-Tariq or Signs on the Road, which basically started the tendency of what we call takfir, classifying people into in a Manichaean way between darkness and light, and declaring the whole of society outside the light and into the darkness. So this kind of Muslim Brotherhood tendency is the mother of Qaeda, of ISIS, of the Libyan Fighting Group, and other Ansar Sharia. All of them are actually branches of this. The other tendency, which was new to Libya, which came during the early 80s, is the Salafi tendency. And this Salafi school in the beginning was just a general Salafism that was established by a man called Al-Bishti, but then it developed in the late 80s and early 90s. Unfortunately, one of the sons of Gaddafi, called Saadi, decided that this tendency is a good way to counter other types of extremism, and he made good relations with a sheikh in Saudi Arabia called Rabi' al-Madkhali, who is the main head of the school. And after that, this school spread throughout Libya and is now a fairly strong school. Now, during the revolution against Gaddafi, or the uprising, or the conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, the Madkhalis took the side of the regime and advocated non-violence and advocated not revolting against the regime. But after around 2013, 2014, they began to become politically active, and they began to arm themselves. And there are rumors of some foreign funding for them, coming mainly from merchants of Saudi origin who happen to be associated with them. And these people have built a remarkable network of armed groups. They exist in Benghazi, they exist in Misrata, they exist in Sirt, they exist in Zintan. They're not so strong in the south and in the interior, but these are the main points where they thrive. Now, what's interesting is that they took the side of the Libyan National Army against Qaeda and ISIS, and therefore the army trusted them and poured even more arms and funding into them because they were good shock troopers against Qaeda and ISIS. The problem is there are Salafi jihadists who are armed, and that is not a very good combination. You know, when you have a religious group with arms, I get very worried, because religious groups tend to think that they have the absolute truth, and they are not accommodating of differences. And once they have the arms, they can impose their will. There is a tendency which I have noticed in Libya over the last, I would say, couple of years, which is a kind of a politicizing of the Madkhali school in Libya, which does not even exist in Saudi. Like, it's a remarkable mutation of Madkhalism. What is the relationship between this Madkhalis and Muslim Brotherhood? It's a complex relationship. On the surface, they are enemies, and the Madkhalis fight the Muslim Brotherhood. But on the other hand, some tendencies within the Madkhali school are actually very similar to Muslim Brotherhood tendencies of politicizing Islam. And I believe that in the future, one of the biggest challenges to the rise of the Libyan state will be how to contain this danger of the armed Madkhali school that has developed.
Especially about the Madkhalis in Libya, which is very educational to me. If I may briefly to turn back to the first question, when you mentioned that the good way to go on the stabilization of the situation is the alliance between 150 municipalities in Libya. Are we talking here about some kind of libertarian concept, maybe adjusted to the Libyan background? Or I'm wrong?
You know, the sound was not so clear for this last question. Can I just ask my team to switch off and then on again, because I think there is an issue with the sound, the incoming sound. Are you hearing me clearly?
Clearly.
Yes, I'm getting some static in your voices. Let me just try to redial. Just 1 second, please. Yeah? 1 second. Baruni. Just 1 second, please. Switch it off and on, please. Hello?
Yes, we're here.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't hear you very well. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Let me try to lower the sound. Okay, can you please ask your question again, please?
Yes, I was just thinking about briefly going back to the first question that you already answered on. But you mentioned there that the best way or the foreseen way of stabilizing the situation in the country is setting up an alliance between 150 municipalities. Well, I understand the concept here because, or the background here, because municipalities has proved themselves quite effective in certain areas in providing people with the necessities. But talking about the sub-governmental level of alliances like municipalities, are we talking here about some kind of libertarian concept but adjusted to the Libyan background? Or no?
Concept that is very difficult to define. However, what I have in mind is more like the Swiss models, the Swiss model of the cantons. Places like Misrata, I think, will never again submit to a centralized authority like they used to during Gaddafi's time. This is a fact, and they have their own now. They have their own power on the ground that will prevent them from actually abiding by any centralized authority. I think it's futile to try to impose centralized will. I think it's very dangerous. If the LNA, for example, decides to move into the west part of the country and into Tripoli, the Misratans will not accept this. They have over 600 tanks as a city, and they have over 2,000 tactical vehicles. Do you think they will simply accept the LNA just walking in? They will not. So what I'm trying to say is that why don't we accept the fact that that every single city has its own kind of identity, its own, maybe we can have a gendarme or a local police force to keep the peace in that locality, but come to an agreement between all these centers, because even if each of these cities has a mayor, that will be no more than 105 people council. And if you add to that maybe a council of elders from the tribes, we have about 85 tribes, you are talking about a council of no more than 200 people that will actually be very, very representative of the whole country, you know? And I think if we cut a deal at that level, whereby we say, look guys, we will put all the revenue in centralized accounts, but then we will divide them up according to population. each municipality will get its share, but a certain percentage will go to the defense of the whole country, a certain percentage will go for the foreign policy of the whole country, for the kind of national programs of health and national programs of minimum education, things like that. So that we agree on a certain portion for centralized functions, but then basically trickle down all the rest of the revenue to the municipal councils, which know the needs of their communities much better than any centralized government. I think such a model is likely to actually prove a lot more stable than trying to impose the will from above. And by the way, I don't want to generalize about another country, but I don't think that even in Syria, a kind of a centralized Assad, the old Assad model of imposing will work anymore. You will have to respect locality and somehow accommodate people's local ambitions.
Similarities with the other issues in other countries. We know we had the kind of a crisis in Iraq, and there is, I mean, from 2003, lots of years, kind of left, and now we're having Iraq being stronger, but after a huge crisis. And the only thing that we understand now from the Iraqi story is there is kind of a tendency towards having somebody who can decide in the end of the day. So it's about the society which wants somebody who decides for all of them. It's not only about the communities. And we are making some similarities, and if we think about Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, anyway, there is a tendency, even within the part of the societies, to have somebody, to have some kind of an, I will not say about authoritarian rule, but if it keeps stability, then it could happen. Let it be so. And the neighboring countries of Libya, I don't know, in Egypt or Tunisia, there is kind of a feeling that maybe for Libya there is kind of a necessity to have, this kind of a scenario. And then, after they have somebody who could, take power, other issues, you said about the communities, community of communities, then they will, kind of, the building of the state will happen only after, you have something, as a decision. So it's not coming from the maybe bottom up, maybe it's comes through, through the negotiations between the major groups within the, maybe we should say, political elites of Libya. You said earlier about 150 municipalities, but still, not all of them will be in a kind of a position equal position towards each other. So it's more like Misurata having a say, Tripoli having a say, Benghazi having a say, but what about others? And they could be just discriminated against in the revenues you talked earlier about in any other places. So you need somebody with a strong position to impose its own decision that yes, we need equality. We need to make all of them equal. So this is it. Just a comment maybe.
It has long been recognized in the theory, at least of democracy, from the time of John Stuart Mill, that there could develop something which is called the tyranny of the majority. And what you could have in Libya, as in other places, is the tyranny of the stronger communities over the weaker communities, But what's also remarkable is that in Libya, we've also had tyranny of the minority. The Muslim Brotherhood is a small minority, but they have tyrannized and controlled the funds of the country at the central bank for 8 years now, So these are human questions that are very difficult and that every community has to deal with. How do you balance local ambitions and local needs with the need for some sort of a centralized regulator and equity provider that can guarantee rule of law and can guarantee fair distribution and can guarantee that no community will dominate the others. I don't think that a purely localized solution will work, and I don't think that a purely centralized solution will work. You need a balance between the two. And this balance is something that emerges from communal discussion. You cannot just simply impose it. The United Nations has tried with the Libyan political agreement to come up with something similar, but unfortunately the people who sat to make this agreement were not representative. It was the smart aleck politicians and people with like there were 5 Islamist parties represented. Some of them had like something like 12 members, you know, like Tahrir party I don't think has more than 12 members, and it had a seat at the table. Meanwhile, some tribes like Tarhuna, who are like 600,000, did not have any representation. So we just need to get together in a way that is fair and equitable and basically cut a deal. There has to be a new deal for Libya that can found a state. Another thing which is remarkable is that in all these 8 years, the nuts and bolts, the fundamentals of the Libyan economy have never been addressed. People don't understand the history of what happened to the basics of economics in Libya. When Gaddafi confiscated private enterprise and private property in 1978, he basically destroyed the capital and land distribution of the country. He furthermore played around with the labor unions, so he actually destroyed the labor relations and transformed them into, it wasn't a capitalist system, it wasn't a socialist system, it wasn't even a Soviet kind of system, it was more like an anarchistic system. As a matter of fact, his official ideologue or philosopher called Rajab Budabus wrote a book which was called Anarchism, which was the official book for quite some time in Libya. So when you have such a drastic rupture in the very foundations of the economy, and as we know from political economy, not only of the capitalists like Ricardo and Adam Smith, but also Marx and Engels, land, capital, and labor are fundamental. In Libya, all 3 were transformed, they were mutated, and they were in many ways twisted. For 8 years, we have not addressed this. The land registry in Libya is still closed. The capital distribution is completely unfair. It is a clique of Tripoli-based militias and warlords and Islamists who control 90% of the revenue of the country. The labor, in terms of young people, we have had no job creation except war jobs. The only job you can find as a young man is in a militia. So unless we address these fundamentals of the Libyan economy, it is very difficult to make progress. And I don't think this can be addressed centrally only. You have to have a discussion. And at the Libya Institute for Advanced Studies, we've had several seminars on these topics, these issues, because they are very important. As a country that has transformed from a socialist system to a kind of a quasi-capitalist system, and all your experiences, both negative and positive, in privatization and what happened with the oligarchs and what happened with the siphoning off of public enterprises into making them to private and so on. Your experience is also very important to learn from, you know, because in many ways what's happening to us today after 2011 is very similar to, and similarities are always difficult analogies, but it's very similar to some socialist era countries that became capitalized overnight, where a small clique became extremely rich and the services that used to be delivered by the socialist system completely collapsed. And the Libyan people are suffering because of this. And we need to address this.
Dr. Knight, I have a question, and I want to cover a ground that maybe was partially covered during your lecture, during our discussion. It's about the opportunities for reconstruction and development. How can you estimate the possible effect of the South-to-South cooperation in these terms? Do you think that neighboring countries, African countries, could somehow insert themselves in the process and participate in future Libyan development. And maybe that will be the second part of the question. And the third is, the first is, how can you evaluate the 2 days impact of the neighboring countries like Egypt on the conflict resolution process?
Okay, regarding economic development, you know, we need to understand from history how countries thrived and try to replicate those success models. In Libya, historically, cities like Ghadames and Kufra and Murzuk, if you read the travel notes of great travelers of the late 19th century, thrived over one very important factor, which is trans-Saharan and Saharan Mediterranean trade. Libya has a remarkable opportunity to be a crossroads that can make a lot of money from transit trade. We have lost all these routes, and these routes have now become routes of drug trafficking, human trafficking, terrorist supply lines. We need to retrieve the old roots of trade and re-establish our heritage of having remarkable connections and trade with Africa, with historically with Timbuktu and even Ghana and Borno and Sudan. We need to re-establish this connectivity to Africa. Gaddafi did have a Pan-African policy, but unfortunately it was too personally centered. It was about him being the king of kings of Africa and so on. What we need to do is to have serious connectivity to Africa. Who's closer to invest in Africa and work with Africa, us or the Chinese? You know, I think we have much better opportunities for such trade. You know, when you look at Tripoli, what is the historical fame of Tripoli? Was because it was a trading post. We had connections with Venice and with Naples and with Sweden, and very early on, centuries back. So I think we need to reestablish these connections. This Libyan South has vast water resources. Contrary to appearance, the water is under the ground. We have vast fertile land. We have vast opportunities for electrical supply. We should not be exporting so much of the gas and oil. We should actually generate the energy we need for manufacturing and for other projects. And if we do that, I think it is possible to imagine a belt of prosperity in the south of Libya that can offer opportunities, not only jobs for Libyans, but for Chadians and Niger-based and Malians. And I think if it's done in an organized way, in a way that can not snatch these people from their communities and countries, but make them thrive in their own countries as well as work with Libyans, I think that there is huge opportunities for development. Another thing which is very important, when I visited Russia, I was struck. I visited the Chamber of Commerce, or the Association of Chambers of Commerce, and it was remarkable what they were doing with the BRICS organizations and with Brazil and with China. And the economies like BRICS can thrive, you know, without having to forever be dependent on the dollar or be dependent on the Americans being happy with us or not happy with us. Or I think we can develop a remarkable program that can be not only Pan-African but also Pan-Mediterranean, work across the Mediterranean, but that can reach out to Russia, to China, and to Brazil and Argentina. I think it is possible to have an economy that has solid fundamentals without being in a relationship of dependence where we simply sell the oil, get dollars, and then we buy even the gasoline back, only to smuggle it to other countries because of the subsidies. Our current model is an absolutely idiotic model. I believe rather than export the oil and gas, we should actually use them as products for plastics industries, for fertilizer industry, for for new chemical industries, and to use the gas for aluminum extraction, for gold smelting. There are many things that we can do. Even our energy needs, if we spend the money from the oil to build solar farms, we can supply Europe, not only Libya, you know. But unfortunately, for 42 years, we've had a failed economic model. And for 8 years, we've had a failed anarchistic and chaotic model. And it is high time that Libya develops, because if we don't do something with this oil, we might find ourselves in a situation where our oil is worthless within 30 to 50 years or less. And then what do we do? We now have an opportunity to use what's left of the oil during the left period of its usefulness to build a viable economy that can actually be diversified and can be connected. I believe that Libya should be a free zone entity that is connected to all African countries, connected with the Mediterranean, connected with Russia, with China, with South America, and yes, with America also, and with the UK and all other countries, but in a balanced way, so that we're not dominated by anyone.
Neighbors on the conflict resolution process.
Look, if you are a rich man living in a lavish house with lots of gold and money, and you are living in a neighborhood of hungry people, you should get nervous, okay? And this is not because your neighbors are bad, but simply because of the inequality, you know? Egypt has 100 million people. We're only 6. You know, we're surrounded by, if you add all the countries around us, we're surrounded by 200 million people who are poorer than us. We must understand that we cannot have peace in such a situation. You need to make sure that you thrive in a way that also makes your neighbors thrive. That you must also provide jobs for your neighbors, you must trade with your neighbors, you must contribute to the development of your neighbors, you must help your neighbors, because only with neighbors who are more comfortable can you be comfortable. Egypt has discovered now gas and oil, especially the Eni fields in the Mediterranean. Libya should have contributed to that investment. We should be investing in Egypt to make Egypt more viable, because the less viable Egypt is, the more dangerous it is for Libya. And I think the idea of a zero-sum game is quite idiotic. There is a possibility for a win-win-win-win situation, not just win-win situation, a multi-win situation. And that is what we should try to achieve through reorganizing ourselves, through educating our young people to realize that they have an existential threat if we continue with this inner fighting and this inner strife and this killing of each other.
Thank you. We understood your position, but I also wanted to ask you about another state, not the neighbor of Libya, but a very close country, as we can see on the statistics in economy cooperation between Libya and this country. I mean Turkey.
Which country?
Turkey Republic.
Turkey, yes, yeah.
Can you tell us about a few words about how you can see now the cooperation between Turkey and Libya, and your position on Turkey's engagement in political process on the west of the country, and also participation of Turkey in political process in Libya?
You know, Libya was part of the Ottoman Empire for 500 years. The Turks, and it's more precisely the Ottomans, have left a legacy of madrasas and mosques and a cultural heritage that is important. Libya is very close to Turkey. It is geographically close. Shipping things from Turkey is cheap. Turkey has remarkable construction companies. They've got remarkable industries. There is so much to do with Turkey. There is only one problem with Turkey, and that is it has taken the decision, especially after the Egyptian coup, to make a complete alliance and complete alignment with the Muslim Brotherhood. And for us, this is the single most important, I would say the only problem we have with Turkey. Mr. Erdogan's commitment to the Muslim Brotherhood has been very costly for Libya. Turks, unfortunately, through their intelligence services, have supported the arming and the financing of armed groups from the Libya, the Benghazi brigades, to the Ansar al-Sharia, to the even this last week we caught some armored vehicles being shipped to Homs. The 2 weeks before, there were 4 containers full of ammunition. Almost every month there we capture a shipment or 2, and God knows how many other shipments go unchecked. So with the Turks, I think my policy would be, and it's very simple: stop supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, and may God bless you, and come and we work together for finishing the projects that have stopped since Gaddafi's time, and for doing a thriving trade. We don't have any problems with the Turkish people. We don't have any even with the Turkish government. The only issue we have is with Turkish policy of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I understand that for you Russians, maybe they are an ally in Syria, and maybe they are you have a different arrangement with them. God bless your arrangements. That's your own business as a country. But for us, we find it remarkable that to say that you're fighting terrorism, and at the same time you're funding Muslim Brotherhood and Libyan Fighting Group. There are 5 television stations that belong to the Muslim Brotherhood Libyan Fighting Group in Istanbul, including RAID news agency or channel, including Panorama. These are big television channels. The operations rooms of the Muslim Brotherhood are in Turkey. Most of the leadership of the Libyan Fighting Group is in Turkey. The leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood is in Turkey. So this is the only issue we have. I've had historically an amazing relationship with Turkey. I was a professor, a visiting professor at MAKHMUTOV University. I was teaching at Marmara University. I know personally many of the politicians of Turkey because they studied with me at one point or were teaching with me at another. But what I cannot accept is the Turkish insistence on supporting Muslims. If they give up this policy, I think Turkey can become very close ally of Libya.
Dr. Matt, I have a question. I want to ask you about other regional actors as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. What interest have these countries in Libya's situation, and what influence these countries to political process in Libya?
Look, there is an alignment in the world. Just as in the time of the Cold War, there was an alignment of 2 sides. Just as in the during the Nazi rise in Germany, Christianity was split between Nazi Christianity and what was called the confessing church in Protestant theology. You know, Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There was an either-or. Is Christianity a fascist movement, or is Christianity a love-based movement? Islam today has an either-or, to put it in Kierkegaard's way. There is an either-or. Is Islam a political fascism, or is Islam a religion of peace, compassion, and love and mutual understanding? Is Islam the Islam of Sayyid Qutb and Maududi and the Muslim Brotherhood, or is it and Bin Laden and Baghdadi, or is it the Islam of Al-Azhar University, Qarawiyyin University, Zaytuna University in Tunis? Which Islam are we following, and what is the identity of Muslims today? It's not a secret that there is today a very clear either-or in the Middle East. Countries that are on the side of the politicized Islam are Qatar and Turkey. And they are very clearly doing it, explicitly doing it, without any apology or without any hesitation. Countries that are aligned with the other type of Islam are basically the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco. Okay. Now, Saudi Arabia is an interesting case because, on the one hand, it does counter the Muslim Brotherhood and its branches. On the other hand, the Salafi movement is distinct from the Azhar consensus of the other countries I mentioned. So there is again within the ranks of one side, there is a split which is very important to not forget. So in Libya, we have representatives of both of these sides, meaning when I say sides, conceptions of Islam. There are people who want to politicize Islam in Libya, and they are the Libyan fighting group, the Muslim Brotherhood, and their allies are Turkey and Qatar. There are other people who want to fight this tendency and who align themselves with Al-Azhar and with the Qarawiyyin and with the traditional Islam of Libya, and I belong to that school. It's very important, you know, in the human sciences, what's called in German the Geisteswissenschaften, to say, to have objectivity, but I believe that objectivity means not being absolutely neutral, because I don't think humans can be neutral, but being open and truthful about your allegiance. My allegiance is with the type of Islam that is in Al-Azhar and Qarawiyyin. I'm against the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan fighting group. So, hello, I am happy that we have a women representation in this discussion. I didn't realize that before. Special greetings to you. Now, so we have this alignment. The parties or the stakeholders in Libya who are aligned with traditional Islam find the alliance with Egypt and UAE and Jordan and Morocco more natural. And some people call this proxy wars. Some people say that there is a war of proxy between the Turks and the Qataris on the one hand and the Saudis and the UAE on the other hand. I believe it's more important and existential than that. I think that there is an identity crisis in the entirety of the Middle East. And the Middle East has to make up its mind. Which Islam does it want? Now, just last week, and I was honored to participate by giving a talk in the side conference. His Holiness Pope Pope Francis came and visited the UAE and held the Mass for over 150 Christians in the UAE. This is not an Islam that would be acceptable to the Muslim Brotherhood or to the Libyan fighting group. Okay, this is an Islam that is in the historical alignment and heritage of Prophet Muhammad, who actually invited Christians to his own mosque to have a discussion. Omar, who gave Christians their rights in Jerusalem. This is a fundamentally different type of Islam than the Islam of the Muslim Brotherhood. So, to go back to your question regarding regional stakeholders and regional actors, yes, they are influential in Libya, but mainly because there are Libyans who believe in this kind of tendency and who have no hesitation to coordinate and to cooperate with countries who are helping us to fight the terrorism that we are fighting.
That also answers the last question from
Dr. Mike, thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. I have a question on your regional involvement into Libyan situation. I mean, first of all, the European Union and the efforts of France and Italy to mediate somehow the situation inside Libya. How can you assess the situation? Do you think that their attempts may have any fruitful consequences for your country?
I am more aligned with the French position than the Italian position, to be quite open. When Ghassan Salama took office, he said that he will need a year in order to deliver presidential elections for us. And I believed him. So I declared my candidacy for the presidential election back in March, based on Ghassan Salama's promise. And President Macron also believed Ghassan Salama, so he held 2 meetings in France, and we ended up with a deadline of 10th of December for the presidential election. Unfortunately, the Italians got into the act, maybe with some British support, and they managed to do the Palermo meeting, which basically fudged the date and made it into spring of 2019. And now lately, Ghassan has reneged even on the presidential elections and is talking of only parliamentarian elections. So there is a fundamental difference between the French position and the Italian position. However, most of the fighting that is happening in the media, especially the Italian media, actually has nothing to do with Libya. It has to do with inter-European politics. As you well know, Mr. Salvini likes Mrs. Le Pen and hates Mr. Macron for ideological reasons. Right-wing northern Italians have more in common with fascist French than they have with their colleagues from the left in Italy, and vice versa. So what we are seeing in this media fight about Libya is really right-wing Italians fighting less right-wing Frenchmen, using Libya as a pretext. We have a proverb in Libya that says, in the sea, when the winds are fighting, the only thing that suffers is the mast of the ship. And that is what's happening to us. As they fight it out, we are actually suffering. So we are hoping that the European Union will act responsibly and will contain all these nonsensical fights between Italy and France, and that they get on with it. I believe that elections are a fundamental right of the Libyan people. I think that the Libyan people have suffered for 8 years and lost over 50,000 souls because they want direct elections. For 8 years, we have not held a single presidential election directly by the people. It has always been parliamentarian, and each parliament that came refused to be removed, continues to perpetuate itself. That was the fundamental fight between the GNC and the HOR. So it is very, very important that we have presidential elections soonest, and I hope that Russia will push in that direction, because it is the right of the Libyan people to choose their own leadership. When I proposed my candidacy, it was more to move the cause of presidential elections more than to actually win them or not win them. The point is, we need presidential elections, and there is already a constitutional framework for it, with Decree number 5 for the year 2014, which actually decreed that there should be presidential elections but postponed them. We need to stop this postponement and get on with the elections. Mr. Salama is saying that the conditions are not right because of security, because of this, because of that. Now the army has taken over the south. 85% of the country is under the army's control. Tripoli is under the control of the GNC, the GNA, or the Government of National Accord. So I don't know what the issue is. There is a clear authority over these territories, and they can both deliver elections. But they're creating an artificial issue because the Muslim Brotherhood know that if we go to elections, they will lose for sure, and that the results will be miserable. So they keep trying to stretch them, and unfortunately the British are helping with this. The British ambassador knowingly just talked to some of our parliamentarians and said that Britain sees that there should be only parliamentarian elections. I am going to, inshallah, meet with the British to tell them that the advice they should be giving is to Theresa May, because she needs some good advice, but they should leave the Libyan parliament to decide if we are going to have parliamentarian or presidential elections. That is a Libyan issue that should be decided only by Libyans.
There was a great opportunity quick report, because it was very detailed answers for our questions, and thank you for this.
Well, I am really grateful for you getting together and for making this happen. Grateful to every single one of you for participating, but especially for the organizers. And I hope to see you in Moscow soon on the next trip. We should make a special point of meeting person to person, inshallah, with all of you. I thank you, and I urge you to not hesitate to give us advice. Stanislav is near you. If there is anything, advice or guidance that you want to give. I am a philosopher. One of the things I learned early on is that I know that I don't know, and I am willing to learn from all of your expertise. So I welcome your advice and your guidance. and I hope that you can help your government to develop policies that are outside of the box. We should get rid of the old schemata of looking at Libya and think about it as a new opportunity for a stable North Africa that can actually be part of a remarkable, thriving global economy, inshallah. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. So, hope to.
God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.